I'm going to make a simple little prototype here with 4 screens, and you're going to be able to click along to go through the screens, and in the process you'll see how I can create a simulation of text input. So I've got a keyboard here, and I'm going to simulate a user inputting text. That's a question that we get asked a lot. So first, I've got my initial screen here, and this should be the home screen, but it's actually not set as the home screen. So in the inspector, I'm going to check home screen. That'll make sure that this is the first screen that shows up when I open the preview. All right, so I've got this text here that says name here. It's like a placeholder text. I'm going to click draw link and make a nice big link around that text and link it to this next screen. And I'll make a new transition for that. All right, in the transition designer, I want to design a transition where the keyboard slides up and this text will slide up as well. So I actually want to put this screen right on top of the other one, so I'll use the Align Screens checkbox, and that locks the screens into alignment. So at the start of the transition, the keyboard should be off the bottom, and then I'll click to the end just to preview that animation. Okay, that looks good. The next thing I want to do is connect these similar layers. So this text and this text are exactly the same. So I'm going to select both of those, what is your name and what is your name in both screens, and then click Connect Layers. And then the other text, name here, I'm going to do the same thing. Select both of those and click Connect Layers. And to make sure this looks really good, I'm going to select both of those connected layers, and over here under Behavior, I'm going to click Hide in End Screen. And that just makes sure that the text layers are never overlapping. Since they're exactly the same, I don't need to do any like crossfade. And by hiding one of them, I won't have any overlap and the text won't look like weird and extra bold. All right, so there's my transition, which is basically working, except for this cursor. So at the start of the transition, let me just slide that cursor down so that it slides up along with the other text. Oh, and it's actually not in the start screen. So at the start state, I should hide this. So I'm going to fade it out. Okay, that works. And I'll call this Reveal Keyboard. Okay, now once I arrive on this screen, well, you know what? I'd like to make this cursor blink so that it looks like a realistic cursor. And I can do that with a behavior. So I'll select the cursor, click Behavior, and in the Behavior Designer, I'm going to make a state where the cursor has been faded out. So I'll just slide the opacity down to 0. You can see that animation. Then I'm going to use timer links, and there's a shortcut to easily make a timer link. Right-click and drag from one state to the other. And I'll set the timeout to 0. That means after 0 milliseconds, I'll go to the new state. And then I'm going to use a timer link going back. So same thing, 0 milliseconds, I'll go back. And let me select the layer and change the easing. So I'm going to use classic easing. And I want the duration to be like, you know, a little bit bigger, almost 600 milliseconds. So about half a second between blinks. I'm going to preview this screen by holding Shift and clicking the Preview button, which opens to a preview of the screen that this behavior is on. And we can see that cursor blinking. It looks really realistic. I like that. Okay, I'll close the preview. I'll name this Cursor Blink. Save and exit out of the Behavior Designer. And all right, so what was I doing here? I need to create a way to get from this screen to the next screen where the text is filled in. And I realize I don't have a cursor on this screen, but I probably still should. So I'm going to select the cursor that I just created, paste it into this screen, and I'm just going to use my arrow keys to move it over so it's at the end of this text. And because I copied that behavior, it's still going to have the same blinking behavior here. All right, so when you tap on the keyboard, the way I like to do text input is just allow one tap on the keyboard to take me to the next screen that shows the text being already filled in. So there's no need generally in your prototypes to have each letter be typed in one by one. I often like to just have a single tap on the keyboard anywhere, takes me to this screen. That's usually a pretty convincing effect. So I'll make a new transition for that. And again, I'll align the screens for this transition. You can see the text is kind of doubled up here. So this text is exactly the same as the text below it. So I'm just going to hide that layer. And this cursor, well, let's start with this. I've got the Nathan text here. I'm just going to fade that out. I'm going to switch back to the spring easing for all these. So that's what I've got so far. Oh, I've got two keyboards here, and they kind of overlap. So I'm just going to hide the keyboard in this layer too. And all right, so that text fades in. That looks good. But I want the gray text behind it to fade out. So at the end of the transition, I'll slide the opacity for that down to 0. Okay, that looks good. The only other thing I need to do is to deal with this cursor. So I'm going to select the cursor in both screens, click Connect Layers, and now the cursor animates across. So I think that'll be a pretty convincing effect. Kind of looks like the text is being typed in, just enough to convey what's going on. And I'll call this Type Text. That'll be the name of this transition. And I should try that out. So I'm going to select this screen, hold Shift and click Preview, and click on the keyboard, and there's that effect. Cool, that looks good. Now from this screen, when I tap on the return key, I want it to go to this last screen. So I'm going to draw a link, a nice big link so it's easy to tap over the return key, and target the done screen. Again, I'll make a new transition for this, and I'm going to use aligned screens as well. At the end of this transition, the keyboard should be hidden. So I'm going to go to the end state, slide the keyboard off the bottom. That looks good. And this text, I'm going to have it kind of slide in from off the top of the screen. Maybe I'll have it fade in as well, so I'll fade it out at the start. That causes it to fade in as it animates. And then at the end of the transition, this text, along with the cursor, I'm going to have it all slide down, and that'll fade out as well. All right, that looks good. And I'll call this, the default name I think sounds good for this one. Then I'll just make one big link here, because I just want to give myself a way to get back to the start screen. And I'll go into the preview, and we can test the whole thing out. So starting on this screen, when I tap name here, that's a really convincing effect. Looks just like in iOS when you tap on some text input. Then tap once on the keyboard, and it looks like the text has been typed in. I like that. Then click return, and it takes me to this final screen. And I can go back around again. Cool, so hopefully that gets you thinking about how you can simulate text input in Flinto and gives you some nice examples of creating transitions and using behaviors to add little extra bits of realism in your prototype.